Welcome back to the channel and thank you very much for clicking this video. If this is your first time in, my name is Brandon Vincent. I'm a real estate agent here in St. John, New Brunswick with eXp Realty. And today I want to tell you about 5 things that you did not know about this city. And make sure you stay tuned for number 5 because it's absolutely my favorite. Let's get right into it. Number 1. Did you know that St. John, New Brunswick has some of the highest tides and strongest tides in the entire world? St. John is right off the coast of the Bay of Fundy. So the Bay of Fundy moves about 15 meters or 50 feet every 6 hours. And I know from a first-hand experience of actually working inside the bay as a commercial diver, which I worked at as for about 2 years, working right in the ocean, in our commercial diving outfits, which, let me just say, being a commercial diver, I am nearly positive is probably one of the closest things to being an astronaut without actually leaving Earth, because you're working more or less in a spacesuit, a massive helmet, breathing oxygen through a hose, and you're working in an environment with no gravity, or little to no gravity, and also very minimal oxygen. So you're working in an environment where you actually can't survive without the equipment around you. So there was one time where I really experienced the tide's power when I was working on the pipeline that runs from the mono buoy all the way to the LNG. We had to put some sandbags underneath the pipeline so that it stopped the pipeline from bowing. Anyway, we have about 45 minutes of slack tide where we're able to work because the tides are so powerful that if you were in there anywhere outside of the window of slack tide is right in between high tide and low tide. And it's about 45 minutes to an hour where the tide does not move at all. So I was working in the water at that time as the 4th diver going down. So I was actually on the last rotation of the slack tide. And I had to do something called a decompression stop on the way up, right around 15 feet. And during that compression stop, the tide started to kick. So what I'm doing at this time is I'm hanging onto a rope with my space helmet on and all my gear, breathing through a garden hose. I'm hanging onto a rope that's connected to a barge that's connected down to the pipeline so that we're able to grab this rope and shoot right down to the pipeline. Well, so I'm stopping here, waiting for my decompression stop, just very quick. It was only about 3-4 minutes, but during that time, the tide started to kick. And what I noticed, underwater, you see a lot of debris. So at that time, there was debris barely moving, because during slack tide, there's barely any movement in the water. It's very still. Now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the tide starts to kick. And all I see is all the sediment in the water slowly shift. It starts moving one way. And then another movement of it again, almost waves coming. And at first the waves were probably about 4 or 5 seconds apart, and then they started being sooner, until within a matter of about 5 minutes, until a matter of about 4 or 5 minutes, I was flagpoling off of this rope, off my downline, waiting to come back up. There was so much force coming within those few minutes that I was just hanging on for dear life, and the tide had my body horizontal. And luckily I came up, they pulled me up on surface, and away I went. But just to explain how powerful the tides are, there's a real life story. On to the second point. Did you know that St. John is the oldest incorporated city in Canada? Established by the Royal Charter on May 18, 1785, under the reign of King George III. There was a king in place when St. John first became a city, oldest city in Canada. Which brings me to point number 3. Did you know that St. John had a massive fire back in the 1800s that burned roughly 1/5 of the city? Now, a lot of people do know that there was a fire back in the 1800s, but do you know how it started? At 2:30 on the afternoon of June 20th, 1877, a spark fell into a bundle of hay in the Henry's Fairweather storehouse in York Point ship area. 9 hours later, the fire had destroyed over 80 hectares, which is 200 acres, and 1,612 structures, including 8 churches, 6 banks, 14 hotels, 11 schooners, which is sailing vessels, and 4 wood boats. There were absolutely no photos taken of this. However, survivors who recount the story tell about how the fire carried all the way down to the harbor and burned right down to the water to the point that it looked like that the water was on fire. St. John was so devastated, and so much of the city was burnt because at that time, St. John was known for its lumber trade. With the easy access to wood, that's what the majority of the structures were built out of. Now, of course, after the Great Fire, St. John had a huge mind shift, and they knew that they couldn't use wood anymore because it left too much of a risk for the entire city to burn down collectively if one spot caught fire. During that time, St. John put out a telegraph that was calling architectures, and it actually became almost an architectural headquarters here in St. John, where architects from Toronto, New York, Montreal, and Boston, and California all gathered, to where some of the greatest minds in architecture around all came to help rebuild St. John, which is why we have such a unique architecture. That's why you see now the majority of the structures in St. John are built out of brick and stone. Bet you didn't know that. I just want to pause for a second and say thank you so much if you've made it this far in the video. I really appreciate your attention, and I just want to remind you that if you do like what you're hearing so far, hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe, but you should stay tuned to the very end because number 5 is going to shock you. Which brings me to point number 4, which is the Stonehammer significance and the UNESCO Geopark located right here in our city of St. John. And what the Stonehammer UNESCO Geopark is it is the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And it seeks to build peace through international education, scientific, and cultural discoveries, showing our geological significance of how at one point all the land masses and continents were all one mass formation known as Pangea. And over the hundreds of millions of years, we've split apart to be what we are now. But this works to remind people of that and show them the significance and the millions and millions of year old stones that actually connect certain continents together, almost like big puzzle pieces. Well, if you made it this far, I just want to thank you one last time because this video's turning out to be a little bit longer than I ever expected it to be because there's just a lot I want to tell you, and I am just passionate about telling you and driving this information home here. Number 5 is that St. John, New Brunswick has some of the most affordable real estate in the entire country, okay? If you look up, and I'll put links to it below, if you look up on any website, the most affordable places to buy real estate, St. John, New Brunswick is at least in the top 5, if not top 10, okay? Now, in saying that, that can be very exciting, and that's actually why I believe we've seen such a massive growth and increase in our real estate over the last year. As I mentioned in my last video, the average home price currently, right now, the most accurate information is roughly about $253,000, the average cost of a home here in St. John. If any of these 5 things shocked you, surprised you, if there's anything that you didn't know, drop a comment below. If there's something else that I didn't mention that you know about this city, drop a comment below, let me know, and thank you so much. Now, if you've made it this far, you have to hit the like and subscribe button. And make sure that you stay tuned for the journey because I will be dropping content every Tuesday and Thursday. And I've actually been thinking possibly Sundays. We will see. But for sure, Tuesdays and Thursdays all year. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to us growing together.